We've been looking at several key biblical passages that provide a theological foundation for Jesus as the originator, source, and provider of the church. Understanding his servanthood in relation to his church is important, for it is our model for how leadership and the fivefold equipping gifts are to function in the church. Now we want to look at how these fivefold ministries are actually an expression of Jesus' ministry here on earth and as a model for us.
Welcome to another one of our Leadership Matters series. This time we are taking a unique look at the fivefold gifts from Ephesians 4 and how they apply within each of our ministries. Just click the link in the description box to download our free resources or the complete workbook. You can access any of our other podcasts by going to icmcanada.org/leadershipmatters.
Over the last few episodes, I've taken some time to lay a theological foundation for the biblical leadership and how this should differ from the leadership we see in every institution in our fallen world. I'm aware that I'm going into a bit of more exegetical detail than I normally do in a podcast. But as I have served in various capacities over the years, actually I guess since a young adult over 50 years ago and then throughout my ministry of training leadership, I think this is a necessary thing to do. There may be a reason the fivefold expression of ministries has not been, applied in the church writ large in a balanced, healthy way. I believe not having this foundation is part of the issue. As I said, doing this in a short podcast likely raises more questions than it answers, so I would encourage you to get the workbook and study this yourself in greater detail. If you're doing so, we are now on page 16 to 20 of the workbook. Okay, I made the point that a more complete understanding of Jesus' role in his church has to do with our understanding of the Greek word kephali, from which we get the English word head. We know the literal meaning, the thing on top of your shoulders. But here the figurative meaning is more of a source rather than chief or boss. As our model, Jesus illustrated servanthood, not bosshood. So for a few moments, let's take a bit more of a deep dive into the meaning of this word. Since the original language of the New Testament was classical Greek, it might be important to discover how this word kephali was commonly used in ancient Greek language, which Paul used. There are about 12 passages in the New Testament in which this term is used. Unfortunately, most of the leading Greek English lexicons use the biblical record, as it is translated, as proof rather than incorporating extra biblical sources. The reasoning becomes kephali means authority in the Bible because kephali means authority in those texts in the Bible. So it becomes somewhat of a circular argument, and the conclusion is pretty much already determined. So there ends up being two opposite interpretations. One is authority and the other is source, or a combination of both of these. This lack of precision is likely what has led scholars to differing views on the fundamental understanding of male-female relationships in Pauline literature, as we discussed last time. This, of course, is the ongoing debate between complementarians and egalitarians. And as you've probably figured out, I'm more in the latter camp than the former. If you want a more detailed explanation, though, particularly as it impacts marriage and women in ministry, you can study our first team materials and accompanying exegetical study. Scholars tend to choose a lexicon that fits their theology and belittle others, and I suppose, if we're honest, we all do that to some degree. If you're like me, you're not a huge fan of grammar, and maybe just glad you passed the course as a kid. I can relate. But I think this is so important for our study that I'm going to risk it here. And don't worry, unless you're doing this for credit with the CLI program, there's no test on the end. And I'll try to make it as painless as possible. Okay, so in the classical Greek literature, ranging from the 8th century BC to the 4th century AD, there are 2,336 cases of kephali represented by the writings of 36 authors. Of these references, scholars have identified 49 in which kephali is used figuratively, referring to a person of superior rank or authority. Now, these 49 instances can be discussed in three distinct categories. First, 19 in non-biblical writings. Second, there's 18 in Greek translations of the Old Testament, including 13 in the Septuagint. And third, there's 12 cases, in the New Testament. Now, based on the research of several scholars, let's look at each of these. See, in the first 19 from non-biblical Greek literature, There is no instant where head has the meaning of ruler or position of superior authority or rank. There seems to be no Greek literature where ruler is referred to as head. As in Alexander the Great was the head, kephali, of the Greek armies. Now, in ancient Greek literature, there are thousands of references to rulers and those in positions of authority and leadership. However, while many words are used to describe this function, there are no cases of the use of the word kephali to denote authority or leadership. In only 2 cases in ancient literature is kephali used metaphorically, as ruling part of a person or head or animal. So it would be pretty hard on this basis to apply the metaphor to a leader or a group of people. Basically, the use of kephali being used metaphorically in the Greek language is very rare. Now, this is in contrast to Hebrew, the rosh, and Latin, caput, in which it had the well-defined meaning of chief or authority. However, in Greek, the meaning is more liquid and poetic, more fluid, rather than the detailed meaning needed for daily speech. So while the Hebrew Bible has 180 instances of head used figuratively, the Greek translation of the Old Testament has only 12 cases. The Gospels do not contain a single reference, and the epistles have only 6 cases, all of them in 3 of Paul's letters. See, the reluctance to use kephali in a figurative sense for the word head did not make it easy to translate from Hebrew to Greek or Hebrew to Latin. See, the use of head in Greek was more subtle and sophisticated than in Hebrew or Latin. So what do you think? What's your takeaway from this brief study? Why do you think this is important actually for the study of the fivefold gifts anyway?
We have various free resources available. They will help you discover your own fivefold gift mix as well as that of your team. The ministry flowchart and life cycle will help you renew the wineskins of your ministry. There are links to these materials in the description box below. You can view any of Phil's other podcast series by going to icmcanada.org/leadershipmatters. These include Mentoring Intelligence, Finishing the Race, and Multicultural Teams. If you want a more comprehensive leadership training program for you or your team, check out our Christian Leadership Institute. This is a unique competency-based ministerial training, which utilizes an online platform. For any of our other resources, please visit our library at icmcanada.org/resources.
Before the break, we were looking into the use of kephali in Greek literature and saw that its figurative use is very rare. When used, it is better translated as source or originator than ruler or chief. However, even though kephali did not mean authority in common Greek usage, it is still possible that it could have been used in that way in the New Testament. Paul and the other writers of the New Testament often gave old concepts and words new meanings. For example, using new wineskin to explain this new gospel or the new kingdom. Yet as we looked at some biblical passage last time, interpreting head as ruler or authority completely changes the meaning of the text. It would result in a chain of command and a top-down subordination. We know this is inconsistent interpretation, for it would contradict the teaching of Jesus on servant leadership and mutual submission as a foundation for the relationships within the body of Christ. Yet when the Greek word for head, kephali, is rendered fountainhead or source, these passages have become more congruent and no longer seem to contradict other New Testament teaching. See, another troublesome issue as to why it is unlikely that it was used metaphorically in the New Testament to describe control is that at the time, the body organ used to signify control was not the head, kephali, but rather the heart, cardia. In Greek understanding, the head served the body by giving it life, nurture, and growth, but the heart was the place of the will, the thought, the motivations, and desire. So the New Testament is actually the heart that exercises authority over behavior, and not the head. The meaning of head-body dynamic is reciprocal, not authoritative. It could be paraphrased as this: because Christ is the wellspring of the church's life and provides it with existence and sustenance, in return the church serves him in loving dependency and in recognition of him as the source of its life. Okay, regardless if you are in the complementarian or egalitarian camp or somewhere in between, from Jesus' teaching right through to the early apostles, even as we may have different roles in the body, it's pretty clear that we are not to lord position and power over each other. And this is which I've tried to show, which I would make the case even includes the family. But the purpose of our limited discussion on this topic here is so that the equipping gifts of Ephesians 4 function as they were intended. Even if someone does not come to the same conclusions regarding headship, I would suggest that the principle of servanthood and mutual submission as it relates to authority in the body of Christ is irrefutable. This is not only consistent with Jesus' teaching, but every one of the New Testament writers. So how does this apply to the role of the fivefold ministry gifts within the community of believers? See, in light of the linguistic study as well as the context of other scriptural teaching, Paul could not have intended or meant to establish a new fivefold positional hierarchy for the church. While all 5 of these gifts are for the church today, they are to function in balance and within the context of mutual submission within the church. So let's circle back to our central text in Ephesians 4:11-13. These verses are preceded by what are called the ascension verses of 7 to 10. See, verse 7 and 8 say, "But to each one of us grace has been given as Christ apportioned it." This is why it says, "When he ascended on high, he took many captives and gave gifts to his people." See, in the Roman context, when a general won a victory, he would come back in triumph to his home city and would distribute the spoils of war to the public. Paul uses the same language to create the image of Christ going down to the depths to fight the battle, returning victorious, and then in his ascension leads a victory parade and disperses the spoils of the battle to his people. Now, the literary and historical context is a strong indicator that in some way these gifts are now bestowed on his body, the ecclesia, the church. In some way, he has redeemed this fivefold model. It originated in the very Godhead, is now back with his church for its own health and to fulfill the purposes he has for it. See, Paul connects this teaching of the fivefold ministry functions to the significant event of the ascension of Christ. And among other passages, Colossians 1:15-23 shows Jesus recapitulating or reconstituting all things through his death on the cross. In Romans 5, Paul teaches that the work of Christ as a second Adam reinstates the lordship over a fallen creation. This work of Jesus is a central theme of the gospel. See, coupled with the ascension passages of Ephesians 4:7-10, it would seem that these fivefold functions of verses 11-13 are somehow part of the package of what he intended to redeem. This Christological approach to the equipping functions provides a foundation upon which to express these gifts as he intended. So it's more than just being a boss or CEO. As a second Adam, he is the source, he's a sustainer and provider for his body, his church. Having done all of this, from suffering to redemption to ascension, he then brings his body into partnership with him by giving them gifts in order to fulfill his purposes on this earth. See, the fivefold gifts are in some mysterious way the spoils of war that Jesus was given to the church in order for it to fulfill the mission he gave it upon his ascension in Matthew 28. See, in some mysterious way, they are also spiritual gifts that function for the power of his Spirit lives within each one of us in his body. Now, over the centuries, the meaning of these texts have often come to mean a form of hierarchy rather than a unified set of functions meant to serve the body. See, the approach to ministry has often been on position, titles, and professional clergy. While this may have long-standing church traditions, I would submit that this is a contradiction of the fundamental New Testament teaching. Eugene Peterson, in his book on King David's life, put it this way: "As believers in the church, we take on responsibilities in a wonderful new world of worship and work. We advance in the ranks, and before we know it, we're telling others what to do and how to do it. And then we cross a line. We get bossy and cranky on behalf of God. Along the way, we take over God's work for him and take charge of making sure others live rightly and well. We get the idea that we're important, self-important, because we're around the important." He continues on by writing, "Religion is a breeding ground for this kind of thing. Not infrequently, these God-managing men and women work themselves into positions of leadership. Over the years, the basics of which they began, reverence, love, faith, erode and shrivel. Ouch, eh? How does this understanding of the fivefold gifts from a Christological perspective affect the meaning of the passage? And how are they to be used in the body? See, the theological foundation, which I have taken some time here to expound, has far-reaching implications for leaders in the body of Christ and how they are to work together to equip all members of this new community of believers. See, with this foundation, we want to now turn our attention to each of the fivefold equipping gifts and the application for our own personal ministry and our teams. I'm looking forward to having you join me again. But as we continue, you may want to take some time to do the fivefold gift assessments, and that's included in the resource section. You can see that in the description box below.
Thank you for listening to Leadership Matters and subscribing and sharing us. If you would like to have your own copy of this study, just click on the link in the description box. For any of our other leadership resources, check out our website, icmcanada.org/resources.